when it comes to immigration.
Correct. Yeah.
That's federal, right?
Fantastic. That's federal. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, they can listen to me talking. That's federal, right?
Yeah. There you go.
That's right.
You've been educated. You feel prepared. Podcast worked.
Boy, isn't he giddy?
Love it.
Hello and welcome to our Mexico City edition of My Surrogacy Journey Podcast. Specifically for, God, I'm getting like tongue-tied now.
Oh my
Specifically
gosh,
for US intended parents. Now, this is our last podcast of the day, and those of you who are watching, you'll see that the light is starting to change. But it's been a really good day. We've recorded some amazing content, and this particular podcast is really designed for those US intended parents who are thinking about doing a journey in Mexico City, but really trying to understand what are all of the legal considerations that they need to think about. And we're going to really get into it because we have Tifany, who was amazing on our last episode, by the way.
Last episode, which will be at the end of the podcast season.
Yeah, so not in any order, but she was great.
Yeah,
Yes, but you are really in safe hands because I think you are. I love how articulate you are. Well, obviously, you're very experienced, but I think you're in for a treat because this should answer all of the questions that you might be thinking or worrying about or all of those things. So look, let's get down into it.
Ourselves.
Yes, yeah, go on.
We
Yeah.
probably should. So for those of you who don't know and might be joining us for the first time, I'm Jess. I'm a mom through surrogacy, and I am My Surrogacy Journey's membership manager for all of our wonderful American intended parents coming to Mexico City.
Yes, and I'll just quickly, I'm Wes, and I'm the other co-host, but Jess is a superstar on this series, so I'm just like here to watch. But yes, and then
the arm candy, right?
Exactly, yeah. So for those who might not have listened to the episode that we just referred to yet, Tifany, give us a bit of an overview, who you are, what you represent, and give us a bit of a,
Absolutely. So I guess before I start even that, I'm going to start with the fact that this is my first time to Mexico City. I have traveled internationally significantly, and this city is gorgeous. I didn't know that I know what to expect.
Yeah.
And I think if you're really trying to encourage families to come to Mexico City, and one of the fears is, but it's Mexico, I am telling you, it is a gorgeous city that feels incredibly European, right? And the parks and the trees, and especially this particular area. So I would have no problem recommending a family to come to Mexico if their fear is coming to Mexico.
Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't have any fear, even though it's going a little dark now.
Yeah, it is. But we're in our My Surrogacy Journey offices, which is right in the centre of Flanco. Really safe, lovely, luscious area. Really family friendly, actually.
Totally.
Really family friendly.
Very much. So anyway, so I am Tifany Markee. I am a founding partner of Milner and Markee LLP in San Diego. At my fundamental core of who I am, I'm an immigration attorney. I've been an immigration attorney for about 23 years. I'm a certified specialist in immigration. And I have over the years refined my practice to become an attorney that focuses on the immigration of foreign-born children. It's about the best way I can say it. So it's this very narrow intersect between immigration and adoption, or immigration and surrogacy in this case, unrepresented children. So that is what I do as a core. I help families get children to the U.S., or I handle immigration for children physically in the United States.
Yes, and you are partnering with My Surrogacy Journey to make sure that we offer all of our members, because we call everyone members to make sure that everyone's equal and balanced, but
membership-based organization.
Exactly. And this is about connecting our members with all of those crucial professionals that play an integral part of their journey. And look, one of the things that we're really clear about all the way through is that you must get legal advice, like not just in the country that you're from, where the surrogacy is taking place, but also where you're returning, so that we kind of close that circle. And experts like you are giving really, really clear and thorough advice to people so that they are armed, prepared, and go into this with their eyes wide open, particularly from a legal point of view, right?
And I think the key really is to recognize that while families may love to come to Milanco and come to Mexico City, their ultimate goal, of course, is to go back home and to have their support and to live their lives in the United States just as they have. And so my goal is to be as approachable and supportive and as welcoming in this process, understanding that this is can be a stressful process for families, but it's also an incredible journey for them. I mean, it really is.
And I think the more equipped you are through getting the support and advice from a legal professional, the more efficient you're going to be in managing the exit of that journey. And it is about understanding all the components, make sure you can put everything in place, get the advice when you need it, and then make sure you follow the legal process when the time is right.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why for us it was so important when we were developing this American program to really consider all of those legal elements, as Wes just pointed out. So, when intended parents come on board and they become members, one of the very first things that they're going to do is have a call with you, just so that they understand there's the legal situation. I mean, we'll obviously talk a lot about it here and hopefully answer some really pressing questions that I think are really quite common for a lot of intended parents. But intended parents should know that from the very start, they're going to be guided by you, with that very, very narrow in some ways, but ultimately so vital, such a vital component to their journey.
And I think my number one goal for families when I meet with them is to encourage them to reach out to me with any questions, to really emphasize the fact that regardless of what their opinion is of attorneys, I'm approachable, I'm available, I want to be their partner in this, not an adversary. And I think, as we said in the other podcast, let me help you. Let me help. Let me make things easy for you.
That should be the mantra all the way through your journey. Actually, let the experts guide you. Let them take the fear out of it for you. Because until you know what you're dealing with, and often a lot of intended parents navigating a journey don't know what they don't know. And that's where you rely on the professionals, the ones that have we've carefully curated to work with us as partners, because they have that absolute credibility and can give the member exactly what they need at that part of the journey.
And it's manageable. I mean, it really is. It's a doable process. You just take it a step at a time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into it.
Okay.
I'm sure intended parents listening to this have lots of questions. They might have some fears. They might have some concerns. We all know that there's been a lot of press around intended parents kind of stuck in Mexico City and, not being able to return home to the U.S. So, we will have a number of podcast episodes, I think probably at least 5 or 6, talking about all elements of the legal process that you as an intended parent will go through in this journey. So what we really wanted to do with this episode was give you a really nice overview of what it means as an American intended parent going abroad, going overseas to an international destination, an international jurisdiction to do your surrogacy journey. What does that actually mean for you? So first things first, what actually is the U.S.'s legal position on surrogacy overseas? Is it legal? Is it doable?
Well, I think the State Department in general, which is, I think, the principal entity that's looking at these cases, but both Department of Homeland Security and Department of State are going to say the same thing, which is that it's critically important that families research their countries to which they're going. They research the entities with which they're working, and to understand that the surrogacy journey and the surrogacy legality overseas varies from being downright illegal in some countries, which it is, being unregulated in others, to being very carefully regulated and legal in some. And I think one of the benefits that Mexico, and specifically Mexico City, has going for it is the Supreme Court decisions that have come down, which has led to, I think, a formalization of the surrogacy program, specifically in Mexico City. I can't necessarily say that that's the case throughout every state in Mexico, but I know Mexico City specifically has what has become, in my opinion, a much more predictable, secure process. And I think that the State Department overall will continue to, to advance their positions. I think that they'll become much more, it's not that they're negative now about it, but they're very neutral. They really just say, we are here to receive your documents. We're not here to give you legal advice. Do your research and talk to professionals. But I think overall, their position is if the procedures are followed properly in the foreign country, then we as the U.S. Department and State Department will give you the documents you need to come home.
Yeah, and what I like is like, so in Mexico City, there's a legal framework. There's a legal framework, there's precedent, and there's something called procreation, and we'll listen to this in the episode with Melissa and Enrique. I don't even know what episode it is, but that's going to be a good point to understand. But also that, you know, there's a means to achieve, to facilitate your journey, get the legal recognition but for both intended parents, your child, and be able to leave successfully, you know. And I think that's the key element. And what I've also recognized and seen with a lot of people when they refer to Mexico, as a whole, and you get some criticism of Mexico, but Mexico is a state-led system just like the US. And just like the US, there are different federal and state-led elements that people need to consider. And that's the advice I would give to people is, you know, be very specific about the state that's happening. We're talking about Mexico City. We only work in Mexico City, and for those reasons you just highlighted. But it's about, you know, go into it with your eyes wide open and make sure that you are talking about the same thing.
Exactly. And I truly believe that the State Department, I can't speak for them, of course, but I do think that the State Department probably recognizes, again, can't speak for them, but I think they likely recognize that there's a structure in Mexico City that is predictable to them, and I think much more positive than possibly other states in Mexico. So
Absolutely.
I agree. I don't think you can lump Mexico into one into one bowl.
No.
Amazing. And so, from kind of moving or adding on to that, I guess I should say, are there any particular laws that the U.S. has in place, whether on a state or federal level, that really governs the recognition of children born abroad through surrogacy?
Yes. So that is going to be at the federal level, at the federal level within the United States. When we're talking about the state level of all 50 states versus the federal level, the federal government is the one that recognizes the citizenship of the babies born abroad at birth. And so again, you know, depending upon the evergreen nature of this particular podcast, in this particular time, there's been a lot of press about birthright citizenship, the issue birthright, which really principally focuses on the birth of children physically on U.S. soil. This is very different. These are situations in which the children are born as U.S. citizens. The minute they take that breath, the blood coursing through their body is a U.S. citizen by virtue of genetics and a number of other factors that are met, including the relationship between the intended parents, are they married or not, the prior physical presence, which if we can go into the weeds a little bit or not, but really talking about the requirements, but understanding that the U.S. recognizes that when these criteria are met, the children are literally born U.S. citizens, whether they're born in the state of Kansas or they're born in Mexico City. It doesn't matter, because the first breath they take is as a citizen.
Amazing. And I think that clarity is important, because I think there's a lot of, not misinformation, but people just don't naturally come across this type of, or have to worry or consider it. And I think sometimes when they start looking into it, whether they see things on social media or whatever, I think it's really good to get that really clear information from a professional.
Right. And and the good news is that we've had some expansions of our regulations, maybe not expansions, but reinterpretations of our regulations in both 2014 and also 2021 that expanded that definition slightly. Prior to 2021, for example, the genetics would only flow from the U.S. citizen spouse. So the U.S. citizen spouse had to be the one that was genetically related to the baby. After 2021, the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security expanded that to say that if the U.S. citizen is married to the genetic parent, so let's say that you had a situation where you had, say, a permanent resident man married to a U.S. citizen wife. They used an anonymous egg donor, so the baby was not genetically related to the wife, but was genetically related to the husband as a permanent resident. The baby can impart the citizenship through the marriage of the two of them, because the baby is genetically related to one. So those are some expansions, again, very much getting into the weeds of things, but I think our government has been much more understanding of the fact that our citizenship regulations were written literally in the 1950s, before anything could even be conceived with art and IVF and surrogacy.
And the world's moved on so much, and family building is evolved.
And the concept of family building. And so I think the good news is that our government has continued to advance those interpretations, understanding the nuances of I think the progression of family building, as you said, and the modernization of family building.
And I think that people come to surrogacy in lots of different scenarios. I speak to not necessarily US intended parents, but I speak to a lot of European, and there's lots of different complex elements from an immigration point of view to consider, and that's why we would absolutely recommend speaking to a very specialist immigration, just so you understand what you're dealing with, you understand what your options are, but also if there's any impacts that you need to consider really early on in your journey.
Right. Well, and I've met with families over the years and over the months that have discussed surrogacy abroad and have said, well, if it doesn't work with our particular genetic embryos, or it doesn't work with my husband's sperm, we'll just go on to donors all the way around using a genetic, gestational carrier. And so my caution again goes back to the citizenship flows through genetics. The one small exception is a 2014 expansion relating to gestational intended mothers, but it wouldn't apply in these situations where you have a gestational carrier here. But really, genetics are king. And so I think recognizing, we talked a little bit about in the other podcast about making sure that because of that, you work with the best clinic possible. As we said, coming to Mexico might be a less expensive option. Cutting corners on your clinic should never be on your radar. There should never be a drive-through option at your clinic, because that's the DNA. You lose the DNA, you lose the ability to get your citizenship.
Yeah, but I also think that highlighting it and understanding that how much of an important role it plays throughout this legal process really should give people caution about making sure that they are working with the most reputable 100%. Clinic to safeguard that genetic element, and just make sure that everything is done in the right way.
Absolutely, and seek the clinics that are going to have the best reputations, the best standards. Because that's not the place to cut corners.
No, not at all.
Absolutely
not at all.
Like I said, fly economy here. Yeah. Don't save it.
No, totally.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important. I mean, and I love that you've highlighted the fact that there's that biology and that what is king, or queen, whatever.
Right.
And one other element which you briefly touched on is that not every parent has to be a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
Does there have to be at least one U.S. citizen in order for this process to take place?
So that is the key. Is in a married couple or two intended parents, at least one of them has to be a U.S. citizen. If you have a single intended parent, a single intended mother, or a single intended father, that individual has to be a U.S. citizen. That is the key. The good news about it, though, is that they don't have to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. They can be a naturalized U.S. citizen. So you can have an individual who's immigrated to the United States, has had sufficient physical presence in the U.S. to become a naturalized U.S. citizen. So that's the good news, is it doesn't have to be, or it could even be an individual that was born abroad, got their own consular report of birth abroad, and is a U.S. citizen that way. So that's the good news, is that it doesn't have to necessarily be just a natural-born U.S. citizen.
Fantastic. I think it's also really important, kind of following on to that point, for our listeners to know that even if you are not a U.S. citizen, and perhaps you are a green card resident living in the U.S., while this particular process might not apply to you, that doesn't mean that surrogacy in Mexico City is not possible at all. It just means that you would
different route.
It's just a different route.
Yeah. And I think that I've had consults with families that we've talked about the issues of maybe if they're within a year or so of becoming eligible for citizenship, they just wait because they only have to be a citizen when the baby's born. And so, there are situations where it might be better to wait and become a citizen and go forward. If they insist on going forward as permanent residents, that becomes an immigration issue. It's very different than a citizenship issue. It's very much rooted within our immigration pathway, which is, of course, a conversation for another day.
And it also depends on what the immigration status is of the person and what country that is applicable to and what the laws there and where you want that legal recognition. It's, we throughout Mexico City Pathway, we are dealing with intended parents from 18 different countries, right? And currently, but every single one of them has a very different and unique element that needs to be considered. So we're always very specific about getting legal advice, immigration advice in the country where that's applicable, 100%. Just so everyone knows what they're dealing with. And look, in most scenarios, there's a way to navigate through it.
Right.
But the only way in my world to navigate through it is getting legal advice and understanding what that looks like.
Absolutely.
Putting a plan in place.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're done now. Should we just go?
No, I've got a few more questions, and I think the questions that I have, and which I hope will be helpful for intended parents, are ones that I know we all feel very passionately about. So I think it's great to talk about them, and again, for our intended parents, as they're considering their journey in Mexico, to understand from your very, I hate to call it niche, but it is, but niche legal expertise. You are one of the, if not the best family immigration attorneys in the U.S.
I appreciate that.
Working.
There are some really good versions of me around the country, but I'm honored to be part of this journey.
But you are incredible, and you have such knowledge and such expertise. So based on your knowledge and expertise, and as you said, your 23 years of working in this field, what is your expert opinion on leaving a surrogate on a birth certificate with parental rights?
Right. So this is an interesting issue because I know that there are families that are working with agencies here that are doing what I'm calling the traditional process. When I meet with families, I'm saying there's a traditional process and there is a legal process, or a more, I think, modern or refined process. The traditional process, of course, follows the basic presumption that the gestational carrier is the legal mother, which is a very common presumption in, I think, a lot of Latin American countries. I think if you were to go to surrogacy in Colombia or Venezuela, I think that's their presumption as well, that they don't have the supreme, they don't have the cases to necessarily rebut that. I think where Mexico, and especially Mexico City, is really beneficial is that the Supreme Court cases have opened up these either pre-birth orders or post-birth orders to remove the gestational carrier as the legal mother, because she really isn't ever the intended mother. And I think we've talked about this I've talked about it with other family attorneys in Mexico who said that their concern with having the gestational carrier on the birth certificate is that it really is almost a degree of fraud, because she is representing herself to a civil registry, to a court, or to whoever she represents herself to be the mother of the child, without any intention of actually mothering the child.
Exactly.
And so I think for that reason, simply looking at Mexican presumption and Mexican laws, I don't think that we should ever be in a position to encourage a woman to basically, for lack of a better term, misrepresent herself. But then I think the other half of it comes out from the standpoint of simply protection. So that's the protection of the surrogate, which I think is critically important. But then there's also a protection as well of the intended parent and the child, where there's never a good idea to leave a woman on a birth certificate or leave an individual on the birth certificate that is going to have full legal power over your child, but without any of the responsibilities that go along with it. And I don't think that that's a good idea. I think obviously the gestational carriers that you work with are phenomenal, but what if a family works with somebody off the charts that isn't? Could she assert parental rights in a child because she's still on the birth certificate? And so I think for that reason, even if it takes a little bit longer or you do a little bit more work in the front end of it, it is what I'm approaching to families as the gold standard.
Yep.
Not having the gestational carrier on the birth certificate, doing the pre-birth order or doing the amparo post-birth resolution should be the gold standard.
Absolutely.
Of what these families should go, so that when they leave the country, they are leaving with absolute secure evidence of their parentage.
Yeah, and that process is kind of the legal standard, isn't it? That legal certainty is there, and we talk about this a lot throughout all of our podcasts. It's about managing risk, right? And the way to mitigate and make the risk the lowest it can be is to follow a legal process, and do not take any risk of leaving the surrogate on their.
Now, the U.S. consulate, though, is aware of both processes, and they haven't yet fully updated their website as of this podcast, but they are aware of both processes, and their position is that if the gestational carrier is named as the legal mother on the birth certificate, she has to be willing to participate in the CRBA and the U.S. passport process as the legal mother, giving her permission for this child to get a U.S. passport and leave the country. And so that brings in complications about, here's a woman who's just given birth. Do we really want to ask her to go through something like that for a child that she has
no obligation
no obligation to do, and no role of parenting? It's an awfully huge ask, in my opinion. And I just think that the consulate is aware of that, but they're also recognizing these either pre or post birth orders in the intended parents being named as the sole parents, the sole legal parents, which I think they're encouraging to see as well.
Yeah, no, and I think we could talk about it all day long, but I think for me, you articulated it really well there, Tifany, in terms of the risk. What I was hearing loud and clear was, do not leave the surrogate on the birth certificate, follow the legal process, and get out and tie off that knot where you don't have any kind of baggage left.
Right. Well, I think one of my favorite terms now ever that I may use from you from a prior podcast is we are future-proofing this case. And that's exactly what it is by taking the extra efforts to do that, you are future-proofing the baby, you are future-proofing your rights. Because as a reminder, the consular report of birth abroad is not evidence of parentage. It is simply evidence of the citizenship of the baby. So while the consulate may permit the biological parent to be named, and the biological parent can name his or her spouse if they're okay with that, it is not evidence of parentage. So leaving Mexico with a consular report of birth abroad that lists the intended parents, but a birth certificate that has the gestational carrier on it is not, that you're not closing the loops, right? Yeah. Then you have to go back to the U.S. to then terminate those rights through some other U.S.
And in some respects, you create more work, aren't you, when you get back? It's so much more of
uncertainty.
It's risk, isn't it? You once you leave, who knows what could happen?
Well, and who knows what could happen to her? Again, I never want families ever to think the worst of surrogates, but she has an extraordinary amount of power.
Which you've allowed her to have.
Exactly. Yeah. In asserting legal rights that really, again, she has no intention of ever actually implementing, right?
Yeah, and you would always like to think that people would manage that in the most genuine way, but again, don't take the risk, take that away, and then you never have to worry about it.
Exactly. So again, it just future proofs, right?
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And talking of the future, are there any legal consequences for the child or the parents long term? That intended parents need to be aware of if they're doing surrogacy internationally. I mean, we just covered, I think, a lot of that. If you do not follow what we think of as the correct process, as the process that we feel should be standard for all intended parents, and you leave the surrogate on their birth certificate, obviously, there are lots of
correct
consequences. But if you do everything correctly and get that pre or post birth order, the intended parents are on the birth certificate. Under Mexican law, you do the CRBA, you go back. Are there any long-term consequences? Is there anything long-term that intended parents need to consider?
Well, I always encourage families to have a conversation with somebody within their state to determine whether a confirmatory adoption, a step-parent adoption is in their best interest to do within their state as well. And I always think that if we can give the child the ability to have U.S.-issued documents in the future, again, that is the gold standard, right? They're leaving here with a declaration of the legality of their parentage as well as a confirmation of the citizenship of the baby. But can they do something when they get back to then give them access to a U.S. court in the form of a confirmatory adoption, a step-parent adoption, again, whatever is available within their state, that then gives them access to a document that's issued within their vital records, within their state, that backs that up. And typically that's what these are, right? It's essentially the U.S. court taking a look at the foreign court system and saying, yeah, we're good. Like that looks good. We agree with that. Or looking at it and saying, we've reviewed everything and we're going to add A, B, and C to comply with our state law.
Yeah, and so I do think that's not all countries recognise that. As an example, British they don't recognize other jurisdictions. We don't have that. And then in the UK, they have to go through a whole new legal process to get that recognition legally in the UK. So the fact that they recognize those documents in the US, I think is a really positive approach.
Absolutely. And I think that those are good final steps. Again, you always want to plan for when you're not here for your children, right?
Yeah.
And do they have the documents available to then go on and lead productive lives when you're gone, right?
And feel secure in the fact that they have that recognition.
Exactly.
But I think sometimes, and look, and it's not intended parents' fault, but I think often they're so focused on the components of the journey, they're not really, they're here and now, and they're not focusing on, the impact of these decisions in the future. But this is why this podcast is so important. It's about how do we kind of future-proof, give them all of the skills and all of the information to make the best decision that feels right for them.
And as attorneys, in what I do and in the work that I do with either art attorneys or adoption attorneys in the U.S., is we always encourage families to just finish by closing the loop within their state. But that requires them to meet with somebody in their state. That's a state level entity. So we talked about the difference between the federal and the state. The federal is immigration. It's the Department of Homeland Security, Department of State. But within the nuances of what happens when they get back, that's where they then have to go within their state elements.
Yeah, so lots of different elements to consider. But, and I know that sometimes this can be quite overwhelming and sometimes difficult to really get your head around because we deal with it all the time, you deal with it all the time. But it's what you need.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. But I think my reinforcement going back, as I said at the beginning, it's all doable. It's you walk through the steps in small steps, and none of it should be so overwhelming that you don't do it.
No. And working with professionals like yourself and being supported by us really makes it manageable, bite-sized chunks, making sure that it's not overwhelming, and you're only dealing with the stuff that you need to right now and not thinking 20 steps ahead when really you need to be focusing on step 10.
Absolutely. Exactly. And I think that's the key. It's work with an agency like you, work with professionals who will only ask you to do as much as you really need to do, still planning ahead, but work with you in those small steps so it doesn't feel overwhelming, right?
Yeah, because we all know that a journey can really consume you. It absolutely consume everything. And then, but you also then need to think about, the impact that has on you, your relationship, your mental health. There's lots of dynamics at play that, and we know that. But but this podcast really is about helping people consider the things that they really should be.
Yeah. And hopefully, by listening to all of your expert advice, intended parents will feel comforted and know that this is absolutely possible, that there are U.S. laws in place to recognize Mexican birth certificates, that they are able to get a U.S. passport to bring their child back. And as a member of My Surrogacy Journey, they would be working with you to support them in all of that. And it's doable. So we do have another episode, possibly part 1 and part 2, that does a really deep dive into all of the legal processes. So applying for a CRBA, how that works, confirmatory adoptions when you go back home. So listener, please look out. At the moment, it's episode 22, but it might be episode 22 part 1 and episode 22 part 2.
There was a lot of great content in there, right?
It was amazing.
And a lot of banter and a lot of conversation.
There is. I mean, I really want to leave it in. I do, because it's, I think
it's so important.
It is.
It's so important. But thank you so much, Tifany, for giving us this overview. And I hope it's just really reassured anybody who's listening that this is possible and it's doable and it's legally safe and secure. You do it the right way and work with the right people.
And thank you guys for giving a framework in an agency that wants to do everything the right way and really, really encourages families, really requires families, not encourages, but requires families to walk through all the loops. I think your position is, if you want to cut corners, we are not the agency for you.
We're not, absolutely not. And I'll be really firm with that, because when you don't follow the process, we end up picking up the pieces. And our whole mantra and the way we've engineered our pathways to stop you and us picking up pieces
Absolutely.
when it doesn't go where it needs to.
Absolutely.
And that's the whole way that we work, you know.
Sure, absolutely. Well, great.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for
Thank you
being
for
on.
letting me be part of it.
Oh no, we were really glad to have you here. I think you've really helped me understand more of it, because I'm not a native to this
Right.
field, right? I'm just kind of stepping into it. But I know that you watching on YouTube and those people listening, and if we're in your ear or ears, I'm sure this has answered a lot of questions for you. I think it's given you a really good understanding of the things that you need to consider, things that I think there's some really good takeaways from here,
I think if anything, to know the questions to ask, maybe moving forward, right? What now do you know that you didn't know before?
Exactly. And and if you are listening to this and you're potentially working with another agency, hopefully this episode will give you some confidence to be able to ask your agency, what legal process do you follow? Have you considered this? How do you approach that? These are the things that you need to be doing to make sure that they are the right partner for you and are considering all of the elements that are really important to your journey. But look, we could talk all night, and we need to go for dinner, right?
Yes,
We do.
absolutely. So thank you once again,
Thank
Tifany.
you.
We hope you feel prepared and educated. And if you would like to have more education and more preparedness for your journey, please check out the rest of our episodes. You can find them wherever you find your podcasts, whether that is our app, whether it is Spotify,
Acast, Apple,
all of those things.
Yeah.
All of those wonderful places. And if you do listen and appreciate the information that has been given today or that you've listened to today, please like us, leave a review, subscribe to our channels, all of the above.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, hi there. It's like, click, subscribe, all of those things that you do for those who are into YouTube. But also, if you want any more information about the products and services that we provide, head over to our website, which is mysurrogacyjourney.com. There you can find out a wealth of information where you can follow our socials. And, if you want to book a consultation, you want to talk to us, then you can also do that through our website. So that kind of closes the loop on this.
Exactly.
Very usual.
You're very witty.
But look, thank you again, Tifany. We appreciate your support. And for those of you watching, listening, hasta luego.
Bye.